16. We are gathered here for the 24th meeting of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. Before we begin, I ask all participants to please read the guidelines written on the updated cards on your table in front of you. Measures in place to prevent audio incidents, protect the health and safety of all participants, including our interpreters. You will notice there's a QR code which links to a video should you need more information. Please wait till I recognize you by name before you speak. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, November 17th, 2025, the committee is meeting to study subject matter of Supplementary Estimates B 2025-2026, Vote 1B under Canadian Museum for Human Rights, Vote 1B under Canadian Museum of History, Vote 1B Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21, Votes 1B and 5B under Canadian Museum of Nature, Vote 1B under Department of Canadian Heritage, Vote 1B under National Film Board, Vote 1B under National Gallery of Canada, Vote 1B under National Museum of Science and Technology, Vote 1B under Telefilm Canada, and Vote 1B under the National Battlefields Commission. And appearing with us this morning, we have the Honourable Mark Miller, Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture, and Minister responsible for official languages. Minister, you're here with us until 9:15, I understand. I will give you 5 minutes for opening remarks, and then I'll open the floor to members for questions. Over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. I want to acknowledge that we are here today on the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Really happy to be appearing before you. Comme ministre de l'Identité de la Culture canadienne et
As Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture and Minister responsible for official languages, it is my job, above all else, to protect and promote who we are as Canadians. We face a rapidly changing world, a world that has presented and will continue to present many new and difficult challenges. It is up to us to show unity.
Canadians, to protect our cultural sovereignty and our ability to tell our own stories. To celebrate our languages, importantly, and to pass on a vibrant culture and heritage to the future generations. It's why our government is taking action to deliver investments where they're needed most. Investing in the arts and culture is a smart economic policy. Canada's arts and culture sector contributes over $130 billion to our economy, including $65 billion directly, and supports directly or indirectly more than 1 million jobs. Every federal dollar invested generates up to $29 in economic activity. Mais la valeur des arts et la culture va...
But the value of arts and culture goes, of course, far beyond the economy. In a world shaped more and more by disinformation, these investments seek to protect democratic values that are dear to us and to ensure Canadians have access to reliable information and recognize themselves in the stories they read, see, and hear. Our vast, diverse country is united by arts and culture, with local media and festivals we support every year. We build ties in communities.
That attending such arts and culture events deepens their connection to our country. So as part of the 2025-26 Supplementary Estimates B, Canadian Heritage received an additional $120.7 million in funding. The majority of this funding will go towards grants and contributions, enabling us to strengthen Canadian cultural institutions, sustain Canada's exceptional cultural scene, while also supporting both elite and grassroots sports. Il aura notamment une augmentation financière, du financement accordé au Fonds des médias.
There will be funding for the Canada Media Fund to better support the creation and production in Canada. This would extend the special measures for journalism and access to local media, so Canadians have access to reliable, timely information from diverse sources reflecting their community's needs and interests.
Will receive additional funding as well to advance the diversity and gender equality within the Canadian sports system. We're also investing more through Sport Integrity Canada, ensuring that athletes and coaches across the country can train and compete in safe and inclusive environments. In addition, we're funding arts and heritage activities that matter deeply to local communities, such as new exhibits for the Montreal Holocaust Museum upgrades to cultural infrastructure like the Richmond Gateway Theatre in BC, and the Fallen Fighters Memorial Project in Whitby. Dans le cadre du budget supplémentaire des dépenses des organismes du portefeuille du
And
patrimoine.
supplementary estimates for Canadian heritage, portfolio organizations received increased funding totaling $29.9 million. This funding will support our national museums as well as the operational requirements of the National Battlefields Commission, the National Film Board, and Telefilm Canada.
The Canada Strong Pass for the summer of 2026. This initiative is a signature commitment of our government, helping families choose and discover Canada while reducing costs for families. This initiative was a great success last summer, in particular and during the holiday season, attracting 2 million visits in participating museums last summer. That includes 500,000 children who enjoyed free admission and 115,000 youth who benefited from discounted rates. In moments of change, what defines us matters more than ever. Canada's strength will come from our ability to tell our own stories with openness, honesty, and confidence. And by investing in our culture and choosing unity, we ensure that the story continues to be written by Canadians, for Canadians, and shared proudly with the world. Thank you for your attention. Je vous remercie de votre attention. Impatient de prendre.
Thank you for your attention. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Our witnesses from the department this morning. We also have Francis Bilodeau, Deputy Minister, Andrew Brown, Associate Deputy Minister, Véronique Côté, Chief Financial Officer, Blair McMurrin, Assistant Deputy Minister, Cultural Affairs, and Joël Momini, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister of Cultural Affairs. Welcome to all of you. I understand you're with us for the full 2 hours, and we appreciate your attendance. I'll now turn the floor over to Mrs. Thomas for 6 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. My first question for you is, you recently made a statement after becoming minister that part of the responsibility of CBC is to foster what you called, quote, social cohesion. Can you explain for the committee what you meant by social cohesion? The reason I ask is because experienced journalists have stated that these words, this term, is often used by the People's Republic of China to mean state control and zero tolerance for challenges. That seems counter to the values that we hold here in Canada, and so I'm curious as to what you meant by social cohesion.
I think in an age that we're all living through of intense disinformation, there is less social cohesion as falsities are propagated through media sources, both legitimate and illegitimate, integral to a healthy democracy. Indeed, the fourth pillar of our democracy is a healthy media ecosystem that exercises rightly its freedom of expression. Again, integral to that is a state-financed public media that is the CBC or Radio-Canada, not state-controlled. Indeed, the CBC's mandate is one that is ferociously independent, and we should all defend that, whether they're saying good or bad things about us. So when there is a lack of support for a public broadcaster, I think that contributes to the spread of disinformation, and social cohesion is therefore affected. It's not about any sort of command and control of the media system that you may see in other countries, but indeed in part of an integral to a healthy democracy.
So what is social cohesion?
Social cohesion is the ability for people to trust their institutions, to not feel like society is falling apart, that we are all living together and able to exercise the rights, in the case of Canada, that define us, freedom as enshrined in the Charter of Rights. I mean, I could go on beyond the time allotted for you to discuss this, Ms. Thomas, but I think we both agree as to what it is.
Well, I think that the committee needed to hear from your mouth what it was. And one of the things that you said in your statement was that it's a trust in institutions, and that Canadians should be able to place their trust in the media. And in particular, you mentioned the public broadcaster, the CBC. Interestingly enough, just a couple of weeks ago, there was a media summit that was hosted in Vancouver. And at that media summit, the president of the Canadian Media Producers Association said from the stage, just before the Prime Minister took it, he said, quote, "Prime Minister, know that every person in this room and the 180,000 people who work in this industry have your back, just as we know you have ours." Minister, this is from a media organization in a room full of media folks directly to the Prime Minister saying, we have your back just as we know you have ours. Minister, that's not the role of the media. The role of the media is not to have the back of the Prime Minister and to be able to tell the story that the government wants told. The role of the media is to be truthful in storytelling, to report the news as Canadians deserve to have it told. When a statement like this is made, it chips away at the credibility of media, and it actually distorts the trust of Canadians that you just spoke about being important. What do you make of that?
Well, what I make of your statement, Ms. Thomas, is you're deeply incorrect in the premise that, first of all, the event itself took place in Ottawa. It was not members, it was in CTV, CBC. It was producers of shows. And those two executives, let's just correct the record.
Let's correct the record. It was news as well. In fact, the head of the CBC was one of the key speakers at this event.
What was said at the event, Ms. Thomas, from producers of shows like Heated Rivalry that was discussed at length, was that in the trade negotiations, these people that are defending Canadian content had the Prime Minister's back. It wasn't CBC or independent journalists.
Their job,
this.
with
So
all due
that's
respect,
false.
Minister, their job is to report on those trade negotiations. And so if you're reporting on those trade negotiations, you just simply report the facts. You don't have the Prime Minister's back.
The job of these people is
That's
to
an
make shows.
illegitimate use
like with
of
puppets.
media.
Like these are producers. They make shows. It's not. They don't. It wasn't.
Minister,
wasn't
you're
journalism.
misleading the committee. It was not just producers. That was part
The
of
two
it.
speakers were
But
head of an organization that talk about media producers.
these are folks who are receiving government dollars, who are producing material that is making it out to the Canadian public. They are telling stories. And they are telling the Prime Minister, we have your back just as you have ours.
They are telling the Prime Minister in the context of being under threat from U.S. content coming into Canada that they want to protect a pillar of our cultural identity, which is Canadian content. That's all they were saying.
They tell stories.
I think you're wrong, and I
Their
think
job
you know
is to
it.
tell stories. So how are they going to tell stories to protect the Prime Minister's back?
They want support financially to be able to tell stories about Canadian identity, whether it's good or bad about
But
the
they're
Prime
saying
Minister.
they also have the Prime Minister's back. So how are they going to have his back?
I think you're making this up. Like, I really think this
I
is something you're
think
looking for.
This
Something
is
where
a
there is
direct
not
quote from the
an issue.
individual who spoke
But
from
you're
the stage.
insinuating that it's journalists that are going to spin stories positively for the Prime Minister because they quote unquote have his back. That's entirely false. These are producers of shows like The Littlest Hobo, for God's sake.
I'll now turn the floor over to Mr. Al Sood for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great to see you as always. And Minister, of course, a warm welcome to you. Thank you for being with us today. Given the relative recency of your appointment and that this is your first appearance, I'd like to give you the opportunity first and foremost to speak to your top priorities for Canadian heritage in 2026 and how this supplementary estimates reflects those.
Well, I think, as I mentioned, and thank you for the question, Mr. Al Sood, I think in the context that we are all living where our Canadian identity is under threat, to make sure that the arts and cultural sector are well supported as they have been in the past by the Canadian government. We can't and shouldn't be the funder of everything in the sector. There is a role of private industry in making sure that Canadian identity and the beauty that is this country is shown through the way we consume media that is in an ever-changing ecosystem. But the Canadian government has to be there. That includes funds for big shows, small shows, arts, Canada Day celebrations that are so important in in waving the flag, particularly in this context. So making, first and foremost, that the modest sums that we give from Heritage Canada to these organizations are well used to wave the flag, to show stories, good and bad, about who we are in this country. Also in the context where that important pillar of democracy, being the media, is under a constantly evolving ecosystem that we are adjusting to make sure that the traditional sources of information are well supported, so that people are getting truthful information so that they can consume them and judge their politicians or judge society accordingly. That's part of what I meant in the question posed by your colleague about social cohesion. The future of the CBC Radio-Canada is extremely important, both in my role as the Minister of Heritage, Culture and Identity, but also as the Minister responsible for official languages, because of the role that Radio-Canada plays in making sure information gets out into smaller Francophone communities in places principally outside Quebec. That's key. We also have, as I mentioned, as the ecosystem and the environment that we are in is evolving, the task of making sure that our kids are being protected from online harms, and that we as a government play a role in making sure that those platforms are responsible. So I anticipate that will be a significant challenge for all members of Parliament, but particularly this committee over the next year.
Thank you, Minister. I've bragged about this directly to you before. Celebration Square is in my riding, very firmly in the middle. It's a beautiful opportunity for people to come together, celebrate the incredible diversity in our country. And in my community, cultural policy drives employment, it drives creative industry growth, tourism, small business development. I want to latch on to something you said early on, this idea of reflecting the beauty that is this country. Cultural policy is often both celebrated and at times scrutinized. And at a time when many Canadians are focused on affordability and fiscal responsibility, rightly so, there's heightened sensitivity around public spending. So how do you respond to concerns that cultural spending is disconnected from everyday realities, or that there are bigger concerns than, or bigger priorities than festivals at Celebration Square, for instance?
Well, it's a good question. You know, when the fundamental question any of us in this position needs to ask themselves, regardless of the role that they played, is what is the role of the state, what is the role of the federal government in any policy that it undertakes, including the funds that it provides to organizations and the many, for example, cultural organizations in your riding. That your Mississauga is so diverse, and it is a thriving, growing community that you are a proud representative of, and on the younger end of the spectrum, I've noticed. So there's a long future for people like you in politics, but we need to be able to nourish the mind, and that includes all the cultural organizations that you represent. That I could, if I had more time, I could fire off all the lists of things that Heritage Canada finances on both sides of this table. And it would be a pleasure to do it, because those organizations are the heartbeat of this country. They, when you're funding an anti-racism strategy in Mississauga, you're raising awareness as to what the challenges are about diversity and inclusion. When you are funding a Blackfoot initiative, cultural initiative in Ms. Thomas's riding, you're raising awareness in and around the issues that the Blackfoot people face in and around the Lethbridge area. So those are small examples of the work that this does, that we do. And otherwise, if they didn't have funds from the Canadian government, they would struggle to have their voices heard. This is about people making their voices heard within their communities, and when we do it properly across the country.
That's a perfect segue to my hopefully short final question. Heritage Canada is uniquely positioned to create opportunities for young Canadians within the creative sector, whether that's someone who's looking to be the next David Miles or someone who's deeply passionate about video games at large. What role do you believe federal policy plays in supporting equitable access to these young Canadians, making sure that they have these opportunities in those sectors?
Yeah, and it's a challenge where young people, including my parliamentary secretary David Miles, who has a song that is well over 1 million listens on Spotify. I listened to it the other day. Not many of us can claim that type of fame, and shares the honor of having a Latin Grammy. he could probably talk to you at length about the struggles that he faced in making sure he could make ends meet, including getting financing. But I think when I've talked to David, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, particularly because he's here, he didn't expect handouts, right? He expected to work for the small sums that were provided from various levels of government. It's not just Heritage Canada that provides tax credits of various nature. Younger segments of the population have challenges, one, accessing these programs, knowing and being aware that they're there, particularly in an environment where things are ever changing. I spoke to a bunch of YouTubers that, given what they were doing, not everyone has access to government funds, nor should they, but they weren't aware, even though they were wildly successful, that they would have some funds available for them to even multiply those things, the earnings that they were making, and
Thank
that's
you,
actually good for the
Minister.
economy in the end.
Mr. Shampoo?
Mr. Shampoo, 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for joining us, Minister, and officials as well. It's always a pleasure to have you. Minister, you're leaving for Paris. You're going to the UNESCO meeting next week. Last June, your predecessor, Minister Guilbeault, allowed the possibility of putting in place a protocol to support the 2005 UNESCO Convention on the Diversity of Cultural Expression, to have it put in place. Protocol to allow states to better legislate in the digital era. Can we expect you to support that proposal to move forward with a protocol that could be adopted at the 2027 meeting? To be very clear in my answer, this is a decision that is being taken currently, so I don't have the answer, the final answer for you this morning at 8:30. That being said, I'd like to highlight that during the last session, I spoke to Stephen, my predecessor. He did exceptional work to save the furniture. This is a protocol, a potential protocol that is not unanimously approved. And in this area, you'll agree, if we don't do things together, success will be incomplete. So I'm looking at this favorably. I've taken note of Mathieu Lacombe, my colleague's position, yes. I'm looking at it favorably, and I will support, I think, but our position is being finalized. Honestly, it's a week ahead of the event. Actually, it's next Wednesday. I can't conceive that you haven't had the opportunity to fully develop Canada's position on this. That would really surprise me that you were telling me the truth now by saying you don't have the answer. And the cultural industry is optimistic, yes. We spoke to them yesterday. A number of them are optimistic, but they're very nervous because this is an essential protocol to really protect cultural industries, especially in Quebec, but also in Europe, for example. Based on the information we're hearing, they're supporting this. So I think it'd be very reassuring if this morning you said, yes, we're going to support this protocol and we'll work on drafting it as quickly as possible so we can put it in place in 2027. That would please many people for you to commit a little bit more this morning, Minister Miller. I'd say this, there's reason to be optimistic in our position, in the position we'll take. I don't want this to be politicized. I want us to row in the same direction, but this is a potential protocol that is not universally approved. Far from that, and regardless of our position, there will be concerted work to be done with other member states so that it works. So the European Union is in favor, and if Canada is too, then there would be a pretty strong consensus. There would be a critical mass, legitimacy. Yes? Do you agree on that? Yes, but for now it's a hypothesis. Okay, well, no more next week and we can be optimistic. I think that may please people. What do you think of the advance, I would say, in how the situation is advancing in digital companies contributing to cultural industries? We've worked hard to put in place legislation. The CRTC regulates quickly or slowly, depending on its workload. Will we have something with the contribution of digital giants to our cultural ecosystem? Let's hope so. Unfortunately, this is an issue that was identified by the United States, for example, as a trade irritant. The reality is that the bills our government has put in place are very significant to have Canadian and Quebec content. I don't claim that it's perfect for now, far from it, but many companies are adjusting to meet those Canadian content criteria to have Canadian content. But in terms of the amounts, you know that they're subject to litigation. Do you not have the impression your government took off the digital services tax in the hopes that that would facilitate trade negotiations? It didn't amount to anything. We're facing somebody who's totally unpredictable. Wouldn't we have to stop classifying culture as a trade irritant, put our policies in place, stand up for them, and protect industries and jobs and our cultures? At a certain point, I'm a little fed up with hearing we have to be careful because it's sensitive for the Americans. The Americans aren't careful about what's sensitive to us. They're blocking us whenever they can. Shouldn't we say at a certain point, we'll do what we'll do, and they'll do what they're going to do? We'll protect our people, and we'll put in place the structures necessary, notably taxing digital giants who are making billions here, having them contribute to our system. Yes, we need to note that neither you nor I are around the negotiating table. I won't speak to the state of the negotiations because there needs to be public discretion. One of the reasons we've invested in the budget in arts and culture is to ensure these people are well supported. It's not as if we were hesitating, but the decision to suspend that tax was, as you know, from the Minister of Finance for reasons related to negotiations, which I can't speak to. Thank you.
The floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Minister. I've seen a lot of ministers come through this Heritage Department over the last 10 years, and Mr. Bilodeau, congratulations, moving up to the deputy spot. I'm going to talk about the missing Indigenous art because that's the last time I think department officials were in here. And I bring it up because actually yesterday I got a call from Cobourg, Ontario, kind of distressed about the way it was handled by the federal government, washing their hands. And I understand there was no legal obligation really to notify the artists of the disgraceful misplacement of the cultural contributions. But Minister, do you feel that there should be a moral obligation over this missing Indigenous art over the number of decades that we've had?
You know, thank you, Kevin. I do believe there's a moral obligation. Anytime you receive art or sacred items from Indigenous peoples, it is something that has to be treated with extra care. On the details of this, and I know you probably want to hear from me, but I would probably accord a few minutes to Andrew, who has a little more detail on it, if that's okay with everyone.
I can get you the second hour too, but very quickly, I just wondered if the department set up a public notice. You know, you kind of wash your hands. We're missing the art. It's under, you know, when we look at it, it's very minimal, $49,000. But how are we going to let the public know? Because it could be in an attic, it could be in a basement somewhere, and I think we have an obligation to the artists to let them know that we haven't washed our hands completely of the missing Indigenous art. Go ahead, Andrew.
So thank you for the question. And I would just say that certainly we need to respect the cultural value of this Indigenous art, irrespective of what how it may be assessed in terms of a monetary value. I believe that you're making reference to the audit of Indigenous art that was conducted, and I believe, in fact, led by Indigenous Services Canada. So I think just on that, that it's work that continues in terms of that accounting and being able to track down those pieces of Indigenous cultural property. So
I didn't get that feeling, Andrew. I got the feeling the study was done. We can't find. We've decided that the art is gone. We're washing our hands and we're moving on. So, I mean, that was the report that I saw. They can't find the art. They don't know where it is. They don't really care anymore, and we're moving on from it. So that was my interpretation, but we'll move on from this. I was just wondering what the department will do in the future now that this doesn't happen again, because it was an embarrassment. You know, I put up a Facebook post on it, and I didn't think I'd get any reaction, and I was shocked, because Indigenous art, as I said in the statement here months ago, the value of Indigenous art has gone through the roof. And if someone's going to donate, or if someone's going to give us a piece and we lose it, I feel for the family, I feel for the artist, and I was kind of awestruck by the department saying, I'm sorry, it's only worth 49,000 under. We're not really going to worry about this, and we're moving on. So anyways, I'm going to move on with my questioning. I only have another minute here. The job cuts at the two museums, Minister, the Canadian Museum of History and the War Museum. Your thoughts on it? They took a big bullet here, both of them. They slashed their workforce, 18%. You know, those are pretty big. 18 and 24% are the reduction of the two museums. Why?
You know, as with any government agency, the civil service as well is going through a rationalization process headed by central agencies related to the reduction of the workforce in particular and cost savings. So these are decisions that were taken. I make no excuses for them, but they are part of this. They're part of this process.
And then on the supplementary estimates, I see, I mean, over $11 million is going to go. You've added some money to the Museums of Human Rights, History, Immigration, Pier 21, the Museum of Nature, and the Gallery of Canada. So you're taking away from the two museums that I mentioned, and now on the supplementary estimates, you've come around and said, here's more money. So can you explain those two?
Look, you can do two things at once. In any restructuring, you do have cuts in one area and investments in others. No one would propose to cut the Saskatchewan Indigenous Cultural Centre that we put $11 million into your riding as part of this simply to satisfy an arithmetic calculation. I think that's a cultural centre that was super important to your riding, but I don't think you would propose to cut it just simply because it was a number.
Thank you. Mrs. Royer, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm really delighted, Minister Miller, that you are in the role, and I'm looking forward to hearing about the great things that the department is going to be doing. In my riding of Port Moody Coquitlam, community and ethnic television, such as the Tri-Cities TV and Parvaz and Korean television through Omnivision, are vital local voices. They survive mainly because of grassroots, volunteer-driven efforts stepping in when traditional systems have pulled back. But they really rely on the large broadcasters to decide whether they are carried at all and how much support they receive. How concerned are you about their sustainability, and what role can the federal government play in making sure that that this system is more accessible for them?
You know, these organizations, like many around the country, are struggling for a variety of reasons. They struggle generally because a lot of them are grassroots. Some are even just shoestring operations that get out amazing information into the community, often cultural communities that are looking for that information, where they want to hear about issues that they care about and want to see themselves in the journalism and the journalists that provide that information. So it is of concern to me that they can survive and thrive. Again, this is a context where the federal government can't always do everything, but we must do something. A couple elements I think would be important for you to note, and the organizations that serve the members of Port Moody Coquitlam so faithfully. The Changing Narratives Fund, which was a $10 million investment over 3 years that supports diverse voices in Canadian media. So Indigenous, Black, racialized, ethno-religious minorities to share stories and experiences. So there's eligibility there. That's part of the Canadian Media Fund that supports diverse communities generally as well. So there are a number of streams, including, in addition, the local journalism initiative that supports communities through press, radio, and community television. It's delivered not by me, but by a not-for-profit organization, so that it does what people are concerned about, protecting the independence of the press. I don't have discretion over it, so to speak. And that contributes, for example, for the news, but also hiring diverse journalists.
Thank you for the answer. I also want to speak a little bit about Freshet News. It's a new publication in our community. We lost the much respected, deeply trusted Tri-City News. They were in operation for many years in our community. They closed their doors, their print media and their digital media, just ahead of the election. But the journalists that had 20 and 30 years of experience recreated Freshet News. But they are also facing many challenges. But that's actually not my question. Just wanted to give a bit of a shout out. CPAC is essential to parliamentary transparency. And
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt, Ms. Royer. I think we have a problem with interpretation.
Okay.
Did I understand
All
that
right.
correctly? We just need to suspend for a couple of minutes
Okay.
while we resolve that problem.
Need to reboot it.
to Ms. Royer with another couple of minutes left.
Thank you, Madam Chair. CPAC is essential to parliamentary transparency. And when viewership is strong, for registered wholesale subscriber fees, they have not kept pace with rising costs, limiting its ability to modernize aging broadcasting infrastructure. How is your department thinking about long-term sustainability for public interest broadcasters like the much relied upon CPAC? And can you talk about the access to parliament? Can you make sure that access to parliamentary democracy keeps pace with how Canadians actually consume our media? Thank you.
I think the work. Thank you, Ms. Roy. The work that CPAC does is indispensable because it covers stuff that even the most ardent journalists outlets don't cover, and some of it is like watching paint dry. But I think it is important. What's that? Like, much like my answer currently, but we're doing a couple of things. We are waiting for a CRTC decision that would create a sequence of waterfall events that would see CPAC get a proper support that it deserves. So that is important. In the meantime, we're bridging them in a number of ways, including recently an investment of about $5 million over the next 3 years for CPAC to continue. I will not hide from you that is not all that they want, but those are ongoing discussions in order to make sure that we are supporting the proper broadcast of all parliamentary activities.
Thank you. I'm really glad that you're having those discussions. Thank you, Minister. See.
All right, moving to Monsieur Champoux pour 2 minutes et demie.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. We've been consulted by independent TV stations in news and in the regions for the local news fund. Last June, if I'm not mistaken, the CRTC authorized Chorus to join that fund. Chorus is eligible because of its global TV stations, and that was a reasonable decision to admit Chorus to the groups of beneficiaries of that fund. The arrival of Chorus means that a large share of that fund is taken up by Chorus to the detriment of the other players, which are all smaller regional players that cover areas like Abitibi, and then in eastern Quebec, there's an independent station that broadcasts CVA. So those stations urgently need that fund to survive, to maintain their newsrooms, to keep them open. The money that was supposed to go into that fund was supposed to come from digital companies, but that's slow in coming, and the stations are at risk of closing. The Association for those stations asks the government to provide support, I think $3 or $3.5 million a month, until money from digital companies comes to make up the shortfall for those companies. This is a matter of survival. This is for local news. Is your government going to do something to save them soon? That's a good question, Mr. Champoux. I don't have a perfect answer for you once again. You've identified very clearly we are awaiting the funds from the digital platforms. And of course, there's more demand with Chorus in the group. This is something to keep an eye on. I'm not insensitive, far from it, to this issue, but I don't have a resolution. The solution has been proposed. I think it would be easy. It wouldn't be very costly as we wait. Time is of the essence. We can't say we'll look at this later. There are stations that are about to close because they don't have the funds, and those amounts would save them. This is about local journalism, which is already weakened by digital companies. It's really in serious jeopardy now. It's not the only issue, but this one would be easy to solve pretty quickly while we await funding from digital companies. I think you could put some pressure on this and convince your Minister of Finance to free up some funds. Well, you know his level of energy very well. Yeah, we're working on this. You've identified it. It's not necessarily just our department. There are different solutions, but we don't have a resolution yet. Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Généreux for 5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister Miller, for joining us. I'll echo my colleague. We've all been contacted about this. When you talk about social cohesion, national social cohesion is important, and so is regional social cohesion. And in our areas, small TV stations or even radio stations and newspapers as well, they all need help. They're suffering a lot, and many of them are on death's doorstep. And the solution proposed, because of course C11, C18 didn't deliver what they were supposed to deliver. We need to be clear on that. The funds and the agreement with Google, where there's $100 million for all media. From that amount, $7 million goes to Radio-Canada, and $120 million in your latest budget goes to CBC Radio-Canada. Why is that $7 million still going to Radio-Canada if it's the case? Simply because they're entitled to it, just as the others are. It's a decision on your part to decide if in an agreement with the Government of Canada and Google where the money goes. Now, I get back to your explanation of social cohesion. CBC Radio-Canada, you just gave them $120 million. That's a right you have. You promised that for the election. But how is it that in an agreement with Google and our regional media are the most penalized now? It's not Radio-Canada, that is. Radio-Canada is 100% subsidized by the public. Regional companies are often private and small. They need that support. I don't understand why there's still $7 million going to Radio-Canada when you just gave them $120 million. I don't want to lack respect. This is money that's distributed based on the number of journalists. There was a cap put in place, so that's the reality, that CBC Radio-Canada was entitled to these funds. Of course, the state can't do everything, and everybody is suffering, so we need to make choices. And you know as much as I do, because these people spoke to you as well. They want money, yes, but also tax credits that would apply to them. Once again, this is something we are working on. We'll start a study in a few weeks on media. What we'll hear and what you'll hear as well from Canadian media doesn't paint a pretty picture. The pre-meetings we've had with the people who come to see us because of this study, the list of witnesses just keeps getting longer because the media system in Canada is really in jeopardy. And sincerely, do you believe, if I remember correctly from what was done ahead of C11 and C18, is that there would be about $300 million that would be brought in and redistributed in the media universe in Canada and Quebec. Do you think those bills have done what they promised to do? They didn't meet their obligations. Well, it's not a full success. People are adjusting to the reality of C11 and C18. That includes the litigation in place. The amounts are north of $300 million. That's close to $1 billion if it were to succeed. That's not nothing. You're aware that they're contesting a portion currently, so it's not possible to give the money to regional media through the media fund. They have nearly infinite funds. They could drag this out for years and years before the courts and contesting the law. So what do we do while we wait? What does the government do what will it do to support dying local media? Once again, Social cohesion is essential, not just at the national level, but at the regional level as well, in the use and presence of media in our regions. If tomorrow morning 50% of regional media disappear, and there are just 2 or 3 sources of information, I don't think we can talk about national cohesion. I agree with you. We are trying to address this. We don't have $800 million, but within your party, your colleague on your right thinks that social cohesion is a state conspiracy, not Mr. Waugh, the other colleague. There is a lack of consistency in your party on the use of that word. Thank you. Next, Mr. Tumba. 5 minutes. Madam Chair, thank you. Thank you, Minister, for joining us. Earlier, I saw good news in La Presse. It's very important, so I'll speak to it. Canada is 3rd in the world in trust among citizens, after Sweden and the Netherlands, with 73%. Canadian Heritage is a stakeholder with the Canada Strong Pass. How would you comment on that, Minister? Could you repeat your question, please? I'd like to have your comments on Canada being in 3rd place for social trust among citizens. I think it bodes very well, but we are in an ecosystem where there's little trust in some institutions, especially with young people. So, yes, it's important. It's important to me to be proud of that victory because there's national unity and social cohesion. But as your colleague, Mr. Généreux, said, that doesn't mean there aren't regional issues that would risk that social cohesion. We need to work together to make sure we're all together, especially with the threat with our so-called friend to the south threatening us with all sorts of things like a bridge. So we need to keep an eye on this. For young people, I think it was very important to have that Canada Strong Pass, to encourage them to visit museums and national parks, and to ensure confidence. It's a national treasure to have these huge spaces we can visit. Very few people visit them, unfortunately. But we wanted to give them a little boost to go to the museum. There's the Space and Aviation Museum in Ottawa, and there's the big parks. I think it's the right thing to do. I know we need to keep an eye on the use of public funds, but I think it's a very good investment. Thank you, Minister. Now another topic. I have often talked about the World Cup coming up. Our country will be on the map. Many people will visit. How is Canadian Heritage preparing for the World Cup? And you know very well, I think there's the standard bearer of the Canadian flag twice, Mr. Van Coverden, who's at the Olympics now. He's our Secretary of State for Sports, which is technically under Canadian Heritage. He's working on this. He's in Milan celebrating our Canadian athletes. We're still waiting for a gold medal, but I'm sure that's coming. Regarding FIFA, it's a golden opportunity to shine internationally. Whether it's the diversity of our Canadian team, made up of many new Canadians, or the fact that we're welcoming people here and we can show Canada to the world. We'll have a number of matches which are quite expensive. I saw the price of tickets the other day, and unfortunately, not everybody could afford that. But it's a golden opportunity to really have Canada shine around the world. Yes, absolutely. And we're investing money. I'm forgetting the important part. We're investing millions. How much? $220 million from our department in particular. but also other departments are very closely involved. Thank you, Minister. In my riding, Mont-Saint-Bruno-Acadie, there are a number of cultural organizations that play an important role in local life. What actions can your department take to make access to programs simpler and reduce bureaucracy so small companies can benefit from support from your department? That's always a concern. I look forward to visiting your riding once again. But in a context where the department distributes small amounts often to small organizations, this is an immensely important point because those people don't necessarily have administration. These are people who often work part-time. They don't always have the means to apply for funds, and that's the case everywhere. But especially in small areas, there are organizations like in Montreal. I'm glad organizations receive the funds, but they have more of a capacity to apply for funds. So we're always looking at that. So there's equity in the country, and thank you for highlighting that. Thank you, Minister. I know it's the time where you were supposed to leave, but because we lost a few minutes with the technical problems, could you stay a few extra minutes or not? You know, that's the worst question to ask a minister. We'll ask the officials. 4 minutes.
Un rappel au règlement, Madame la Présidente.
Point of order, Madam Chair. The minister said he was staying for 4 minutes, and you're going to start another round that won't be equitable for the parties. I think either we ask for a few more minutes so we can all have 2.5, 3 minutes. Could those 4 minutes, is it really 4 minutes, or could we push that a little bit?
5, 6,
5
or 6? Okay. 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute. Does that work? Well, 2, 2, 2.
How much?
2.
2 minutes. Okay. Minister, thanks for being here. Thanks for. Have you seen this report? It's by Honest Reporting Canada, and it has some very disconcerting findings about CBC. Basically, that what this did, it used AI to examine CBC's coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. It analyzed 2,789 CBC news articles published between October 7th, 2023, the day of that terrible massacre, and June 7th, 2025. And it found that CBC's coverage of the war demonstrated significant imbalance, and there is consistent, overwhelming bias against Israel. So I'm wondering, Mr. Minister, does it concern you that public dollars are being sent from your department to CBC, and this report calls into question its very, very impartiality and actually questions its stated journalistic standards and practices?
I'd say a couple things, and I don't presume that my answer will make you happy, Mr. Diot. First and foremost, the CBC, as you know, is independent. It doesn't mean that it is unaccountable and that I am not entitled to an opinion on this matter. But I think I want to be very judicious in my answer, in particular because of the ongoing situation in Gaza, but also because the CBC itself has its own mechanism internally. Ultimately, the CBC is accounted to the public, and it's important not to attach that type of condition to financing of the public.
Okay, that's fair enough. But you know, their own editorial culture is being questioned. And actually, this report from Honest Reporting Canada is saying that they're calling for an audit of CBC's editorial culture.
Thank you, Mr. Diot. That's exactly 2 minutes. And Monsieur Chumba pour 2 minutes. Exactement.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, I know it's easy to talk about incredible success, but there's a study of the value of Canadian content with heated rivalry and intellectual property. How can the government continue promoting Canadian identity and values that can echo in Canada and around the world. I think it's important to note that shows like Heated Rivalry should not be the exception to the rule. They should be the rule. It's an example. Well, there are a lot of Francophone references in Heated Rivalry, but it's not a Francophone show. I encourage everyone to watch Empathie, which has great ratings. It's a Canadian production. Without interfering too much, I think we need to embrace the risk that those shows take and really trust the producer's instincts.
Il me reste quelques secondes, je peux ajouter?
I have a few seconds left. To conclude, Minister, I want to pick up on a point on digital platforms that are big players here in Canada. What concrete measures can your department put in place to ensure that Canadian content is better highlighted so that creators from Canada, from underrepresented communities, can reach their audience and benefit socially and economically? Yes, I think we need to have trust in an institution like the CRTC, which manages and regulates Canadian content. It's very important. And without getting into discussions on digital platforms and discussions that are being held between us and our economic partner, the United States, we always want to have culture as a red line in those discussions. Great. Thank you. Mr. Shampoo, 1 minute. 2 minutes, you said. We said 2. We agreed on 2. Go ahead. You can take much more than 2 minutes because it's the last round, Mr. Minister. You probably heard about the report that was on Enquête last week on Live Nation, which in the United States is often accused of having a monopoly in selling tickets for shows. We know they own Eventco here, which produces shows, but we know there's an issue. There's a big multinational American company with Ticketmaster and Live Nation. There's a big impact on festivals and shows, not only in Montreal, but in the whole festival industry. Do you have comments on this? Because it's extremely concerning to see that small halls, which are trying to succeed with festivals in Montreal, are in very precarious situations because of the rules that those big companies put in place. They're dominant players. Yes, that is concerning to me. Any monopolistic practice concerns me and should concern all politicians. In my role, and I've looked very quickly, I think this institution, their relationship with Eventco, they receive about 1% of funds allocated in this area. It's not huge, but it's something. It's not an excuse either. The reality is that I'm more concerned about the artists than the producers. And as you know, this is an organization that produces Osheaga, Jazz Fest, big shows. But in any analysis at the department, we need to keep an eye on artists, especially those who are potentially exploited. Yes, of course, but 80% of shows are in halls that belong to Eventco and by extension Live Nation. These are generally foreign artists. They don't really feature local artists, and that should be of concern. We should ensure that concern shows in the way we allocate funds to support with subsidies in those activities. Do you not agree? I do agree. As I said earlier, we always need to ask where and how will the state take action, especially when there's a quasi-monopoly. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. We'll give you a few minutes to leave, but we appreciate your presence here today.
Gets out of the room. know which Conservative I'm going to turn. Oh, are we at? Yeah, it's the Conservatives. Good. Oh, so you just Mr. Giot, is it Mr. Giot first? Is that what we're doing? Okay. Mr. Giot are we starting anew with 6-minute round? Sure, let's do that. 6 minutes, Mr. Giot.
Thank you. It's nice to have a little bit more time. Thanks to all of you for being here. It's always very revealing. I'm just wondering about advertising. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I think we all remember the Heritage Minute and all of that. But I'm wondering, as a department, how much advertising is run in dollars.
By the department itself? We don't, much of the advertising in the Government of Canada actually will be sort of directed centrally. We don't, as a department, typically do much personal advertising. That's separate, for example, from what CBC might run in terms of its own advertising in the context of its program, but that wouldn't be department-led advertising.
Well, there's an article yesterday from the Star Phoenix that talked about the federal government has increased its spending on Facebook and Instagram, and the article told that the government has spent $78.15 million on advertising. I imagine your department spends some of that money or gets some of that money in advertising. Can you specify any kind of dollar figure or percentage or?
So I don't have the specifics on how much the department specifically spends. We can endeavor to get that back to the committee. What I would say is generally advertising within the Government of Canada is structured by rules set in place by Treasury Board and coordinated through the Privy Council office. But we will endeavor to get you the information on how much the department specifically. It won't be large sums.
Okay. One of the most interesting things from the Star Phoenix article is that of all government spending on advertising, 63% went to digital media. I mean, that is a bit of a trend. People tend to advertise on Google and Facebook. But, Liberal MPs, including the Prime Minister himself, has said that we're in a trade war with the U.S. and we're spending all that money for digital media that's almost exclusively owned in the United States of America. Is that right? We're in a trade war. We're rewarding these tech giants. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, sort of the policy and the choices in terms of how the overall government advertises would not be with me, it would be with the Treasury Board. That being said, I think generally the government will try and balance ensuring that they can reach citizens where they are and ensure that there's efficient communications with citizens with. Absolutely, we are in a trade war, and there have been measures. I believe in the past the government at some point banned advertising on Facebook and Instagram. So that has been looked at. That is driven out of the center, primarily out of Treasury Board in terms of overall guidance and approach.
Well, according to this report in the Star Phoenix, it said that between 2023, 25, the government spending on TikTok plummeted from about 1.1 million to about 180,000. But at the same time period, the government spending on ads for Facebook and Instagram increased from about $500,000 to almost 1.4 million. And the increase on the Meta platforms comes after, years of decline, including a drop of more than 6 million between 22 and 23, and 23 and 24, a time frame that coincides with the passing of the Online News Act. Don't you think that the Canadian public would be concerned by this? I mean, again, we talk about we're in a trade war with the United States. Okay, we'll give you some more money. We'll reward you.
I think I think excellent points are being made. I mean, these are matters that aren't necessarily directly within my area or my ambit in terms of responsibilities. That being said, as an overall posture, I think we've seen the government take an increasingly buy Canadian type of approach. But as Treasury Board and PCO consider the overall posture on advertising, as I said, I think part of what they're weighing is ensuring that the government is reaching Canadians where they are, and at the same time, very mindful that we are certainly in a difficult dynamic in terms of trade, and that those considerations play in. But as I said, these aren't directly under my purview.
So you're talking about Buy Canadian, but again, to stress, 63% government advertising went to digital media, and we know that it's almost exclusively owned in Donald Trump's USA.
I think there has been a shift over a period of time where Canadians are more and more on digital media, and that is part of the reality of where Canadians consume their media. Again, not sort of directly an area for which I'm responsible, but certainly we're mindful that there has been a shift towards digital media. And that's actually part of the dynamic that from the area of our responsibility has led to wanting to have a digital agenda and a regulatory agenda that also thinks about Canadian content.
6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Diot. I'm still trying to get organized here. Mr. Miles, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here. Perhaps a question for Madame Montminy. I'm curious about the future of the Creative Export Program, something I hear a lot about. I think we've probably all heard about it from different stakeholders in Canada. I'm wondering, maybe you can state kind of the importance of that program, but also what it's going to look like in the future, especially as we talk about cultural diplomacy, sovereignty, and how we can, bring Canada to the world.
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Miles. So, yes, the Creative Export Strategy is something that we've put in place 8 years ago. That's specific to helping the creative sector, increase its export in important markets. And we've been doing this through different ways. One is through trade missions, and as you know, you're just about to take part in a Mexico-Canada trade mission over the weekend, and those have been extremely successful in introducing our creative companies to these new markets. So we've done one last spring in South Korea. Prior to this, we had, as well as Japan, and we've prioritized different markets, including Europe and Australia, New Zealand, and so on. So over the last 8 years, we've had really great success in bringing Canadian companies abroad. We also have a program that supports the creative companies in terms of developing export plans. So, and we've expanded this over the years. At first, we were focusing on companies that were already, ready for export, but then we wanted to bring more creative companies into the realm. So over the last 5 years, we've also brought in another stream of programs so that we can actually help Canadian companies that are not quite ready to start developing that skill. So that's been also successful. Just in terms of the success, over the last 8 years, we've helped over 3,000 creative industry businesses and organizations accessing more than 120 international markets. And we've seen the results in terms of impact, in terms of those companies that have benefited from this strategy have been able to significantly increase their kind of export abroad. The strategy is up for renewal at the moment, so it's been so we are waiting for a decision by the government in terms of whether this strategy, which is complementary to all the different services that Global Affairs Canada is offering, but different because it's targeted to creative sector. So we're hoping that the strategy will be renewed. And as you know, the business model, the reason why Canadian Heritage has its own kind of unique complementary strategies, because creative businesses tend to be different, and of course, agriculture or aerospace companies. So a bit of a more targeted support we feel is needed and has demonstrated good results.
Thank you very much. A question for Monsieur Bilodeau. You've come from industry, I think, and we talk a lot about AI. We've just finished a study. I'm curious to know, from the perspective of having come from industry, so you know the dynamic in terms of how quickly AI is moving, now moving into culture. Where do you see some of the challenges around making sure that we're not obviously getting in the way of innovation and moving forward and being key in this, but also making sure that we're protecting copyright and licensing and transparency and all the things that are important to the cultural sector?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think part of the dynamic for all of us, independently of the sector, is that AI is more and more an existing and a real presence across industries, and it's going to shift industries in a way. And so part of what we are thinking of in terms of the cultural industry, and actually there will be a summit with the cultural industry and with the AI industry in Banff in a few weeks, I guess, now, to be able to discuss exactly those issues. Part of the challenge is making sure that our industries, whether they're artistic, cultural, et cetera, can reap the benefit, but at the same time, we recognize that there are shifts and potential restructuring of markets, and we want to make sure that our industries benefit from that, and those include issues of copyright, those include issues of ownership, and I think all jurisdictions in one way are struggling with that in one way or the other. There's international dialogue that's happening, but I'm very much looking actually forward to having conversations in a few weeks, both with the AI industry and with the cultural industry, about where are the areas where there's the greatest opportunities for our creative sectors, and where is government and government collaboration with industry necessary to make sure that Canadian industry evolves and benefits to the maximum in terms of the opportunities that will be presented.
Do you feel like that the cultural industries have been kind of amply consulted when we're talking about the future of AI in Canada so far? That was something we heard from witnesses, is that they felt like they weren't part of these conversations. It was rather industry, but not necessarily the cultural industry.
Well, it's interesting. We're coming from a department that's just spent a lot of time dealing with AI. And AI, if you look at it, in a lot of our ecosystem, Canada became a leader primarily through the strength of our early research. And that research through luminaries like Joshua Bengio and each other actually provided an advantage in terms of our own capacity to understand the technology. Our colleagues over at industry and my colleague Mark Shawn and Minister Solomon have been leading on the development of an AI strategy. We've been very strong advocates, and I owe this to my colleagues, around what does it mean for cultural industries, for artistic industries, and that's exactly why we're going to be participating. We've helped set up that summit in only a few weeks with the cultural and artistic industry. We think that dialogue has to happen. We think that we, as a department, have a responsibility to be the voice of artistic and cultural industry as the government thinks about AI, and we're playing that role very strongly. And we look forward to actually continuing an ongoing dialogue with a sector that will be, or potentially be, so impacted by the advance of not only AI but digital technologies generally.
Thank you. Monsieur Champoux pour 6 minutes.
Merci. 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Mr. Bilodeau. It's the first time you appear with your colleagues before the committee. Surely won't be the last. We'll pick up on the topic of AI. We've concluded a study, as my colleague, Mr. Miles, raised the topic with you. But I'm wondering, because there are impacts that are very significant on cultural industries at all levels. AI affects just about every area of society, every socioeconomic level. Everything is affected by AI. Minister Solomon has put in place an advisory body with prominent people from the world of AI, as you've mentioned. With that advisory body, there's a working group that's prepared different recommendations or conclusions. But for the advisory body and the working group, nobody represents cultural industries. And that's of great concern to me, to see that in such important work, with such significant impact on the cultural industry, there isn't somebody at the outset included from the cultural industry. And now I wonder, because we're about to conclude that study, we're going to prepare a report, And I wonder if you would support a recommendation to establish a working group under the supervision of that advisory council to really put in place strategies for artificial intelligence and specifically the impact it has on cultural industries. Do you think that would be a good idea? The structure already exists in a certain way. Well, a committee structure that would be under something else, I can't speak to that. But what I can say is from our perspective, it's incredibly important that dialogue with the cultural industry and the artistic industry happen, and that's part of the responsibilities of our department to ensure those voices are heard. That's one of the reasons that Ministers Miller and Solomon have decided to establish dialogue with the industry. Won't be the last time. There's a number of ways we can structure that, but we are committed to ensuring, and this is essential for the future of the industry, not only AI, but generally speaking, digital technology. The sector needs to be an active player in these conversations. We need to represent them. That's very interesting. Earlier, you were talking about how experts who have contributed to developing AI, there are Quebecers, Canadians, and that puts us in a leadership role. But we're 100 years behind the United States. Developing AI apps, we're really behind. And in terms of regulations, we're just not there. And with AI, we're falling behind like we did with broadcasting. We haven't legislated for too long on digital, and we see the mess that has left. I wonder, and I'll pick up on the question of the protocol that will be discussed at the UNESCO meeting next week. I wonder how we can deprive ourselves of that essential tool of putting in place legislation that's applicable by Canada, Quebec, European countries, to put in place policies and laws to establish a strong framework for these companies that have huge profits without having to meet the rules that we decide to put in place. I'd really like to have clarification. Earlier, Ms. Montmagny was reacting when I asked the question to the minister about the protocol that's supported by Quebec, by cultural industries, and others. Could you explain your vision of what that tool should be? I think it's essential. How should that be prepared so we have the necessary tools to catch up, if it's possible, on regulating AI? I'll ask Joël to discuss it a little bit. It's not clear to me that we are 100 years behind on AI. Let's say 25. I think we still have a talent base because we are among the pioneers. There's Hinton, Bengio, and others who've helped structure the technology, and we have important centers in Canada for understanding and regulating the technology. Yes, but we've developed a few $1 billion in AI. In the United States, it's $400 billion. We're not even in the race. We need to do what we can. I'll agree with that, and I'll leave those questions to Minister Solomon and his team. But there's a base in Canada for capacity that doesn't exist in every country. Certainly the private sector means that there are big investments in some places. Regarding the protocol, you've heard the minister. There's a broader question, international collaboration on digital issues. I think the Prime Minister has spoken about the importance of realistic collaboration. Joël, maybe you can speak to this, to the protocol? Of course, at the outset, we recognize the importance and urgency of taking action in this area to protect culture in the digital era. We've been there, we've done so. We've done so without necessarily having a binding UNESCO protocol, and other countries have taken action as well in that space. But that being said, we recognize that UNESCO is an important forum to discuss governance, AI, digital platforms in general. There are other forums to do so as well. Minister Solomon is responsible for AI governance more broadly, but through the 2005 convention, we are definitely interested in exploring a protocol as we've done. And in recent years, we've done that with Quebec. We've encouraged UNESCO to continue its analysis because for countries to join, for a protocol to have that strength, to provide a framework for digital platforms, well, it required analysis to make the case that there was a need and how to proceed, what sort of principles should be included in the protocol. So it seems to us that the work is going well. I think we've received all of the information we needed, and now we're at the phase of trying to build consensus around these issues. The operational directives are part of that as well. But that can be complementary. Thank you. Mrs. Thomas.
One of the observations that I've made over the years is that grants and contributions that are made available, that are made available to communities for festivals or community events often go to large cities. So the minister sat here earlier and talked about Montreal as an example. Vancouver receives a lot of money. Toronto receives a lot of money. These big centers receive a lot of money. My community is Lethbridge. It's a population of about 110,000 people. It's not rural and it's not super urban, and so it often gets left out. What is available in these estimates with regard to a community like mine?
Specific to these estimates, we have the Building Communities Through Arts and Heritage program that is receiving $400,000. This is available to a number of festivals. Of course, we have more into our main budget that covers festival and events across the country. So there's a lot of assessment that is being done to determine which festival, which events will get funding. It is a program, unfortunately, that is oversubscribed, so there is limited funding available.
I guess I'm curious as to what metrics are taken into account in order to make sure that, what provisions are made to make sure that smaller communities are considered in addition to these larger ones?
It's a really good question, and I've sort of lived interesting dynamics around other programs that are major Gs&Cs programs. I think we should get you more detail on this. Generally, I will say for most Gs&Cs programming, there's a review of both regional programming and rural versus urban to try and ensure equity. I, 4 weeks in, have not honestly do not have the detail on the specific programs and how that's built into the application. I don't know if others are, but it is a really valid point, and I'm happy to sort of provide more information to the committee on that. Unless Blair happens to know in more detail.
Well, I was just going to add, in terms of one of the programs in our department that does support festivals, like the Canada Arts Presentation Fund, which is for professional kind of arts presentation. Like, there's been a deliberate effort in recent years to calibrate it to support more smaller and medium-sized festivals, which tend to be in smaller centers. Like, that's a deliberate sort of policy calibration that's going on. We have other programming in the department, like the program that Veronique just mentioned is focused on smaller community-based festivals, non-professional, so we're constantly looking at the balance in terms of recipients.
Thank you. I can appreciate that. Having looked at that funding, the majority of it stays east and largely in Quebec. And so when the minister talks about social cohesion and our country being unified, part of that is making sure that dollars flow east and west and don't just get caught up in the larger centers or in Eastern Canada as a whole. And so I think that's just a note of caution for those at the table. My next question has to do with the anti-hate network. Minister Guilbeault appeared here at this committee on September 24th, and he was asked a question with regards to the anti-hate network. Now, it's reported and well known that the anti-hate network received about $1 million in federal grants from 2020 onward. And we also know that they target pro-life Catholics as well as conservatives under the pretext of exposing, quote, neo-Nazis. Further to that, the Liberal government's current Minister of Public Safety has said that they have in fact found bias within the network. And then in 2022, a small claims court judge accepted evidence that the Canadian Anti-Hate Network assisted Antifa, which of course is an incredibly violent organization as well. The minister at the time committed that he would undertake a review of this organization and whether or not they should be receiving funding. Has that review been completed? So again, that commitment was made by the minister on September 24th here at committee.
So Andrew should be able to follow up directly on that one. I know that we did look specifically at that contribution, and I know that we did bring forward changes to our programs more generally. And so following sort of a series of issues that were brought to our attention, we did strengthen our programs and require an attestation.
Sorry, my question wasn't whether or not you've strengthened the programs. My question was whether or not a specific review is done on the anti-hate network, and if that review, if so, it actually needs to be tabled with this committee as per that meeting that took place on September 24th.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So just to confirm that review was completed at Canadian Heritage, and we continue to maintain our relationship with the funding recipient, the Canadian Anti-Hate Network.
Then my question would be, again, the minister agreed at that meeting on September 24th that review would be tabled with this committee, that he would get back to us in terms of decisions made. And so will your department give those documents to this committee to see?
I think you have my commitment to come back to chair the committee not long after this to identify what's been done in terms of documents, and then as appropriate share them within sort of the bounds of what I can do within any privacy or other constraints. But definitely if there is a study that is within the bounds of what we can release, we will do that.
Can we just clarify, Mrs. Thomas, for the officials, are we requesting specific information from them to come back to committee and maybe specify exactly what you want to hear from them?
Sure. I think we could, I mean, it would be easy enough for us to look back on September 24th and the meeting that took place with Minister Guilbeault in order to understand exactly what was committed to. However, my record would say that the minister committed to doing a full review on the anti-hate network and then coming to a decision as to whether or not funding would continue. And he said that that decision would be reported back to us.
And in regards to your excellent question about mid-sized cities getting funding, did you get adequate answers from the officials here, or are we asking for more information on that as well?
Thank you. I appreciate that. I believe their commitment was to get more information to me on that as well. Thank you.
Ms. Royer, for 5 minutes.
British Columbia is home to the internationally revered modern dance company, which is the iconic Ballet BC. But at the same time, Ballet Vancouver is emerging as a new and extraordinary classical ballet company, and they are actually repatriating Canadian talent back from institutions such as the American Ballet Theatre. How is the department ensuring that federal policy supports both established flagship institutions and emerging companies that strengthen Canada's cultural sovereignty by retaining and bringing home our own elite artistic talent?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. The department focuses on next generation of talent through different ways in different components of programs, but one that's notable in our view is the Canada Arts Training Fund, which specifically funds a kind of unique set of post-secondary institutions that is that the next generation of performing artists in specific disciplines like ballet and theater, with a strong lens on diversity and a strong student assistance component to ensure that the participation is equitable and looking to the future and the diversity of that next generation.
Incredible. A follow-up on that. When Canadian dancers and artists must build careers abroad due to limited domestic infrastructure, Does the department view this as a cultural competitiveness issue? And what tools exist to reverse that artistic talent departure?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's an excellent policy question that we look at from a number of angles, like in terms of arts administration as well. It comes up in that context when leaders of cultural institutions are recruited and leave Canada, but likewise for the artists, that are also the public face of these institutions. It's for this reason that we invest in all parts of the value chain in terms of performing arts, like the training upstream and the cultural infrastructure and the audience development, like the presentation to the public, so that they are in a position to be competitive, like in Canada and vis-a-vis international competition as well.
And maybe I'll just mention the ballet in Canada is still, and the institutions are still ones that I'm getting to know. But earlier this week, I met with the Canada National Ballet School, and they were expressing that actually Canada on the world stage is actually a leader and attracting people from all across, and actually through that recognition, exporting Canadian values, exporting sort of Canadian culture, and so I was quite impressed with sort of the place Canada takes in the world of ballet, and I'm looking forward to engaging with the other institutions in that space as well.
I really appreciate that. The minister mentioned that the arts contributes $130 billion to the Canadian economy. And we have many flagship organizations in BC. We call them in the Lower Mainland, they're called the G8. Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, Vancouver Art Gallery, Bard on the Beach, Arts Club, Arts Umbrella. These extraordinary institutions are central to our Canadian identity. Is the department able to ensure that predictable and sustainable core operating support happens so that these institutions remain globally competitive?
I'll see if Blair wants to add, but the core to our mission is actually supporting the arts and culture, and a huge amount of what we do is actually providing supports and financial supports to both the institutions and the artists. It's part of our work to continuously review our suite of programs and ensure that we're providing adequate funding. There are, the government faces multiple pressures within funding envelopes, but it is sort of our commitment to make sure that we have programs that are both evolving with the time, but providing adequate supports to the communities that we try and represent within government. But Blair, maybe I'll turn to you.
Sure. Like our programs are clearly important to the sustainability of arts organizations and the different things they do, but we are part of a policy dialogue with the arts sector on emerging forms of support, like social finance approaches and the role of philanthropy, and kind of growing the pie, like in terms of the funding that's available to build their sustainability for the future.
Well, I think in the philanthropy piece, I think this is concerning to many of these arts organizations because I think that they feel like they're competing for the same dollars, which is a shrinking pot. So in the age of rising costs, space, capacity needs, all of that, I think that many of them are struggling. So I hope that we continue to connect with them and look at ways that we can support. Thank you. Merci.
Monsieur Champoux, pour 2 minutes et demie.
Monsieur Bilodeau, vous arrivez
Mr. Bilodeau, you've come from industry. People in the cultural sector have been calling for a review of the Copyright Act for a long time. I think there's consensus to say that the law is due for an overhaul, to update it, but we've always known that it was at industry that it was blocked. So we took the person who was blocking it at industry, brought that person to Canadian Heritage, and now at Heritage, will we be able to say yes? I won't say that I was the one who's blocking it. In a certain way, it's useful for us to have internal dialogue because we also understand the concerns from some sectors, academic and others. and the desire and concerns of the cultural sector. There have already been commitments for artists' rights. We're working actively on that very quickly because I don't have much time. Do you not think, yes, there may be different realities? You talked about academics, industry has other issues with copyright. Should this not be broken up so we can adapt it to the changing reality in the digital era, so we can manage those realities distinctly, so we can move forward for cultural industries, so it can go as fast as necessary for others? That's an interesting idea. The idea of breaking up the law is not one I've thought of before. I appreciate the committee's perspective. It's active dialogue in the department on how to modernize the law, how that could be done. So I appreciate your perspective. Are you exploring the way we could put in place copyright in the world of AI? This comes up a lot. This is a concern from content creators, among others. I think that's absolutely an issue we're looking at. That's part of the dialogue we're having with industry and AI and the cultural industry with Minister Solomon and Minister Miller. We'll be having that dialogue at Banff. How much time do I have left? 3 minutes? A few seconds. Thank you, Madam Chair.
For 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to go back to the Indigenous art. I need confirmation here. So, is there going to be ongoing efforts to actually locate the missing Indigenous art, or are we going to call this case closed? I was happy to hear there is a moral obligation to let the artists know that their cultural contributions have gone missing, but I need to know because we are getting in our offices people wondering where this case is. Is it ongoing, or are we going to close it for good?
Mr. Waugh, I appreciate you bringing us the question.
Point of order. Sorry, just a point of clarification.
Miles, do you have a point of order?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, it's a point of clarification. This was Crown Indigenous Affairs that we spoke to when they were here, a different department. I just want to make sure there wasn't confusion that that was who we spoke to and it wasn't this department. Yeah. So as long as we're clear on that.
Still goes through Heritage, though.
It doesn't. I think it actually is in Crown Indigenous Affairs.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bilodeau, go ahead.
Well, the point I was going to make, and again, appreciate you bringing this to our attention, and I'm happy to have conversations with my colleague at Crown Indigenous Affairs. It is a matter that was identified through an audit of Crown Indigenous Affairs, and I understand that they are in the process of following and ensuring follow-up on that. I don't have an update on that, but I'm happy to talk to my colleague.
Because I do know you grant them money for the program. There is a connection with your department. The other one, where are we in Marie Chapman, Museum of Immigration, Pier 21? That situation, she was CEO, alleged that she's mistreated staff. She was on leave. I see you have an interim leader. Where is that situation? I know you're only on the job for 4 weeks, but can you update us quickly?
Yeah, I'm quite aware of the situation. I mean, Marie is no longer the CEO. There is an interim CEO. I've had the conversation with the chair about the measures. I know that there was a report of the ethics commissioner, and I've had conversations with the chair around what measures are being put in place within the organization to ensure the health of the organization. The health of the organization and its employees are very important to us. Obviously, as you've mentioned, I'm still early days, but at this point, both the report has been out, and Marie at this point is no longer the CEO of the organization.
Yeah, I saw some very derogatory comments. I hope she or the department would take them back on the investigation on it, because it affected a lot of staff, right?
And I have to be honest. I mean, I was not here or there or privy to. I was not at the department when any of the allegations are made. There has been an investigation, and there has been by the CEO a response to the findings of the commissioner. And so those are the facts as they are. And the facts as they are is that at present we have an interim CEO.
National museums, as you know, in the precinct, along with Winnipeg and Halifax, get a lot of money, the most money of any in when you're talking national museums. How close are we with Regina, RCMP? They want to be a national museum. And, you know, we had a discussion here on this side about small and medium. And I was at the Mackenzie Art Gallery in Regina. Congratulations to them. They actually had the Governor General Awards in their museum this year, first time ever. So they need, you know, the small and medium art galleries, the museums, and thank you to Ms. Thomas for bringing this up. They deliver a lot, and sometimes they're missed. And I just, you know, I wanted to say that to you, Mr. Bilodeau, because sometimes when we go through there, they're struggling more than the national museums, if you don't mind me saying.
I think that's an important point. I appreciate you flagging that to me. I don't know if any of my colleagues, with regards to the RCMP Museum, I am aware of it, but I couldn't tell you the exact status. But I do think you bring a really important point to our consideration.
You coming from industry would know that the telecommunications companies in this country control the media, most of the media, the big telcos. So I did see two long-term stations, Pattison and Stingray, and Medicine Hat and Lloydminster just 7 months ago. Go dark, like that. So I think it's because of the legislation of C-18. They did not deliver the money they said they were going. It's been a disaster since day one. Now we see backroom cash deals with Google. That was talked about by my colleague. I'm really feeling that local news is dead in these communities. And now I see CBC trying to move in Yorkton, Swift Current, and Moose Jaw. They're not the local people of these communities for 50 and 60 years, I might add, are entrenched. And so when they went dark in June, and I see many more coming in the months going dark, and I'm concerned about this, and you're from industry, so you dealt with the telcos.
Thank you, Mr. Waugh. I can tell you're passionate about this. I am too. I appreciate it. I just want to update the committee as well. The clerk has found that the minister did respond with the question about Anti-Hate Network back in November. Perhaps we can recirculate it to the committee so that we have that, but it was a timely response from the minister. Mr. Alsud, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our officials for being here today. I've said it time and again, I think the World Cup creates an incredible opportunity to showcase our beautiful country. And it's especially great for host cities, but there are countless ridings across our country, mine included, that will also be looking for ways to participate in the World Cup. My first question is, beyond the host cities, how does the department anticipate investments will generate meaningful economic, cultural, and sport development benefits across the country? And perhaps a secondary question, is there a mechanism to track regional participation or spin-off benefits outside the host jurisdictions?
I'm going to ask Mr. Brown to answer. As the minister noted earlier, Secretary Van Couverden has been leading a lot of the efforts, supported directly by Andrew in that. So I will turn to Andrew.
So thank you for the question. I think, as you indicated, the co-hosting of this year's FIFA World Cup does really offer tremendous opportunities for Canada in terms of attracting both tourists and those dollars, but also in terms of showing off the country and attracting economic investments. It's important to recognize that in terms of the FIFA World Cup, it is actually an event that is hosted by FIFA, not by Canada or the other countries. And so we play a particular role in terms of supporting them as organizers who are working very closely with the host cities of Toronto and Vancouver, with the provinces of Ontario and British Columbia. And I might also add the local First Nations, the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish in British Columbia, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation in Toronto. And so some of the work that is underway is absolutely taking a look at how some of the excitement can be brought to other parts of the country. And you will have heard how FIFA announced recently that they will have a sort of caravan that is going to be traveling across the country. In fact, there's going to be two, one that sort of starts in the west and moves east, one that's starting out east and moving west, to really involve communities. But also, there's a lot of work that's going on towards looking at what are some of the legacies that can be left behind after the tournament. This is an area where we are at Heritage looking at how we may be able to contribute and what sort of funding may be able to be provided to ensure that there is a legacy, in fact, that goes across the country. But certainly it is the host cities of Toronto and Vancouver who are leading in their respective areas and working with their provincial counterparts to see what can be done, predominantly, obviously, in those cases, in British Columbia as well as Ontario. So much work that's continuing. Just to be clear in terms of the figures earlier, it's $220 million that the Government of Canada has provided to those host cities of Toronto and Vancouver to support the operations in relation to staging of the World Cup games, 13 in Canada, and the additional roughly $100 million that's been allocated and was announced in Budget 25 is largely towards safety and security costs that are going to be borne by federal organizations such as the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and Public Safety, Transport Canada, CBSA, all in terms of some of the impacts that this will have. There are smaller amounts of money that we've received at Canadian Heritage, which are about helping to support legacy across the country, helping in terms of Indigenous engagement and diplomacy, essentially sports diplomacy. And that's one of the things that the Minister, or I should say the Secretary of State, Vancouver Din, is engaged in right now as he is currently at the Olympics.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. That was a very thorough response. You preempted 3 of my questions, so I appreciate that. One final one on FIFA for you. How are departments currently working together in terms of preparing for the World Cup, coordinating responses? I know you mentioned that the bulk of this obviously is from the organizer, but how do we support, how are departments across the board supporting?
We have put in place a number of different mechanisms. Some are more formal, others more informal. I think a very key element has been a sort of governance mechanism that's been put in place over a number of years at this point, and that's not limited to the federal government. That's involved all of those I've mentioned before. So the various level orders of government, the cities and provinces, as well as FIFA itself and the federal government. And I should also clarify as well, the same Indigenous First Nations that I spoke to are also involved in that process. At the federal level itself, we have, I would largely speak to ad hoc deputy level meetings that are held to coordinate and discuss issues of importance of more I'll say general matters related to FIFA. This has been taking a look at some of the assurances that the Government of Canada provided when bidding for the World Cup back in 2018. And there's also another group which is more focused on those security elements, and so that's been more led by public safety and the PCO, National Security Advisor's Office.
Thank you. We are at the end of our time typically for this committee. There's been a request for another lightning round. If the officials can stay for another 6 minutes, is that okay?
We can do a lightning round, certainly.
Okay. It is it Monsieur Généreux pour les conservateurs?
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci à tout le monde
Thank
d'être
you,
là.
Madam Chair. Thank you for everyone. Thank you to everyone for being here. Canada Day has been celebrated for a number of years, of course, and some municipalities, I've heard, have less funding than before. Have you noticed that? Am I dreaming? I'm not aware of that. I don't know if my colleagues are, but if you are mentioning it, I'll look into it. I would appreciate that because I promote all the programs and I want us to celebrate our country, even in Quebec, where often it's a little quieter. What I can say is that in Budget 2025, the department received another $20 million for Canada Day, which is not just in Ottawa, but also for activities across Canada. So I'm not aware of funding going down. Quickly, how many programs do you have in all at Canadian Heritage? Do you have a number? Can you give us an overall number of programs you have? We have about 30 programs. I don't have the exact number, but about 30. Okay. Before the meeting, we had a little discussion, and I was asking you if there was money for infrastructure. You said there had been, and that you were no longer taking on new files because it had been transferred to Infrastructure Canada. If I may, I'll give you the opportunity to explain a little bit what is happening with Canadian Heritage and infrastructure for heritage to inform the public and my colleagues. Thank you. I might turn to Joël in a moment, but historically, there was always a program for cultural spaces in the program to reduce costs. There were efforts made to eliminate overlap in departments, to focus on departments that are maybe better placed to focus their efforts. On our side, there was a reduction in our funding for Canada Cultural Space. Projects that are being reviewed are still eligible, and there's significant funding for infrastructure, including provincial and municipally within Infrastructure Canada. So the main stakeholder becomes Infrastructure Canada. We have ties with that department, so we are still a bridge for stakeholders so we can connect them with infrastructure. Joël, would you have something to add? I agree with everything my deputy minister said. We no longer have time for questions because it's very quick here. Go ahead, just 5 seconds. I would just add that the program, there will still be a cultural space program, but it will be refocused on equipment that can be used in cultural spaces. For example, if a theater needs new lighting, things like that, there will be funding within our department to support renovations and equipment to support cultural spaces. Thank you. Mr. Toumba for 2 minutes. Yes, thank you for 2 minutes. Ms. Momigny, I want to speak to you because a lot of questions have been asked, but this morning I need indicators to measure the impact of cultural initiatives for Black communities, especially in museums and public institutions. I don't have those numbers. May I clarify? You are looking for indicators that you use at the department to measure the impact of cultural initiatives that are for Black communities, especially at museums and public institutions. That's a very important question. We have indicators, Andrew, for our multiculturalism programs for museums. That's a very interesting question. It's a question I'll ask the next time I meet the heads of museums. How do we measure that impact? I must admit, I don't know, and it's a very interesting question. So, Mr. Bilodeau, still with you. How does the department ensure that communities outside of big cities have equitable access to programs funded by the supplementary estimates? As I've said, and I think Blair mentioned this, I'll see if he wants to add something. There's an element of criteria in our programs in general that seek to have distribution in the regions, in cities across Canada. Blair, do you want to add something? Yes, we look closely at the proportionality of funding from one region to another, but especially for the gaps between requests and the rate of funding. And where there is a gap, we make special efforts to mobilize stakeholders, to engage them more, to have them apply for funding. Thank you. Mr. Champoux, 2 minutes. We've been contacted a lot lately by the Biblio-Québec network, a network of libraries in remote areas that share books from one library to another. In Bill C-15, there's the repeal of the paragraph in the Canada Post Corporation Act that guarantees a preferential rate, a very good rate that's essential for those libraries. If that service is abolished, if that rate is abolished, it would really jeopardize that system that allows communities to have access to a very good library service. It's a very good system. It's a system that's appreciated in the regions, that's established, and now there could be fees that could be over $2 million a year in postal rates, which they cannot afford, of course. So I think this is something that's fallen in the cracks, but can I have a guarantee from you that you will look at this carefully, that you will ensure that in no cases will Biblio-Québec be weakened by a measure that was probably added to C-15 in maybe a clumsy way. I don't want to attribute ill intent. I thank you for the question. I'm aware of the issue. It doesn't fall under my mandate. It would be under public services because Canada Post is part of their portfolio, so I can't make a commitment. But because it's libraries, it's under heritage, and you certainly have something to say to other departments. They can act directly. Yes, certainly, we have an interest. And we have frequent dialogue with our colleagues, including on this topic, regarding decisions made for Canada Post. I can't make a commitment on something that's not my responsibility. But for the rest, I count on your support. Thank you. I'll give that message to the Biblio-Québec network. They'll be glad to hear that the minister and the deputy minister are on their side. Thank you to our witnesses today.
And for sharing your excellent and vast experience with us. I will now call this meeting adjourned.
you.